Now, why did that happen? It happened, one, because of the tremendous cost to the government of doing this type of large-scale development. So it couldn't afford to continue to give to communities that were increasingly applying for urban renewal designations the funding to do that kind of large-scale redevelopment, acquisition, relocation now, paying benefits. They couldn't do it. So they went to smaller areas and began to define those areas by using more demographic data around poverty and income and population and unemployment. Data became very prevalent around this period of time. So you had now a shift from large-scale to small-scale redevelopment. It was also a period of time coming out of the war on poverty that started in the mid-60s. The war on poverty started in the mid-60s, and it began to impact because what it began to change was it began to give a voice to the people who were living in communities. Programs like the model cities, the war on poverty, were created in that period of the mid-60s. And so you began to see people being engaged in the dialogue and discussions around what should be these designated areas and how you began to provide funding and resources into these neighborhoods. The Model Cities program, which was enacted in about 1967.
Model City?
Model Cities program. It talked about citizen participation. It talked about having maximum voice of the people. Plans had to come from the bottom up. They weren't forced down from the top in a way like urban renewal was. It was saying, begin to articulate the voice of the people. So you have to have a Model Cities commission and board and citizens, and it had to be community-based. Those are some of the concepts that came around through the whole Model Cities program. And it's interesting today, if you look at it, it was also a period of great leadership development. Because if you look and you would attract people who were involved actively in Model Cities programs across this country in the mid to late 60s and 70s, they are now some of the leaders, elected leaders and community leaders who still today, who started their careers in Model Cities. Okay? That's where it came out of. Community action, it came out of the war on poverty, came out of the whole issue around the Model Cities program. That was the beginning of advocacy. This was also the period of time of the beginning of the CDC movement. The CDC movement started with a grant from the Ford Foundation to a group called Bedford-Stuyvesant in New York.
In Bed-Stuy? In
Bed-Stuy was the first CDC funded by the Ford Foundation that grew out of a program that was created also on the war on poverty through OEO. OEO, after Ford funded Bedford-Stuyvesant and started the whole movement around CDCs, the Office of Economic Opportunity, which was responsible for the war on poverty, created what was called Title IV legislation, Title VII legislation. And what it did, it provided the first funding to 22 CDCs across the country. And the interesting thing about that is that it required at that time that to be designated as a CDC, you had to be involved in economic development, in business development. And that was the thrust of it. And you look again today at the strong surviving community development corporations. They're the ones who grew out of this movement in 1968-69 through OEO because they were grounded in economic development concepts.
OEO is
Office of Economic Opportunity. So they were grounded in the beginning of thinking about the issues around building jobs and creating opportunity and economic benefits and how we share economic benefits. So you had a lot of things that were happening around the same period that I came into this work. CDCs were beginning to be formed. You had a shifting beginning to occur in the structure of how you implement place-based development, from going from large-scale urban renewal to smaller-scale neighborhood development projects. And each one of those projects had a community-based organization. So you also, the whole thing about maximum feasible participation, the voice of people, that was the articulation. I mean, we saw a lot of great energy going on at that time around how to redevelop neighborhoods. And these riot corridors that were designated across the country after the riots in '68. And many of them still today that are areas that have still not been redeveloped in some communities. or just beginning to feel the impact of this. So so I came into this work at a very volatile time, a very exciting time, and when there was a lot of creativity and imagination and advocacy and you know, the great spirit, and I loved it, you know, and it was challenging to work. I mean, my first experience in running this area, trying to get the community to buy into some strategy about how we were going to redevelop it, and going to community meetings, you know, every night. It wasn't once a month, it was every night, engaging the community, was an exciting time and challenging. I learned a lot through that process. It was also a time for me of great innovation, because in this area, when I was a director, we had a lot of people who lived in this area who we tried to delay the period of time of relocating people until a time when we really started the redevelopment. Because we spent a lot of money fixing up properties that people were living in at that time. So not just trying to go in, buy the property and displace them. We acquired it and we kept people in housing as long as we could to work with other people on the staff to help them with their relocation effort. We had a whole staff that did that. Just not only paid benefits, but helped them find the next location for affordable housing. So it changed, but we were also doing a number of programs. I had a lot of young people who lived in the community. In the summertime, I used to hire students from Howard University to come down and work with the young people. We ran a daycare program for 45 kids during the summer with no money. But yet we took them on a trip every week. We involved them in all kinds of activities. How did we do that? I created a staff of professional beggars. We could get money from anybody, from corporations, from anybody walking down the street. We would do whatever we had to say we're trying to do money, raise money to do these things, and we did it. I had a student at that time from Howard University, and I said to him, I said, I want you to do a photography project. You know, now, I mean, I'm not connecting to the arts, you know, I mean, I'm not thinking that way. That's not the reason I'm doing this, right? I'm doing it because I want people to visually see how the community looked and what they could do about it. So I said, I want you to teach these young people how to use a camera. He said, I don't know anything about photography. I said, look, all you have to do is point and click. You know what I mean? So we bought all these cameras, put him out there with them, and today, Ozzy is now one of the leading photographers in the country. Started right there when he was on his track to be an engineer. He's now a photographer and doing great stuff, and I like it because he sends me nice portraits that I can put on my wall occasionally. So, but that happened. That kind of innovation happened. We had I was saying to Robin one day, we were talking, that I had some young kids who lived in the neighborhood, and I was hiring people in the community to work on our construction jobs and making them people who were the contractors to hire our residents. And that was an experience because a lot of people who lived in our neighborhood had dependency problems. And so I had to get my staff to come in to work at 7 o'clock to go to their homes to get them up, to get them to the job site, only to go back and take them off the job site at 12 noon because they couldn't stand the heat because they hadn't had enough coffee or whatever. But I had some young people who came to me and said, Mr. Priest, I want a job. I said, I'm sorry, I can't give you a job. You're only 14 years old. I don't have anything. And so that bothered me that we couldn't do anything for them. So I was in New York over the weekend when this happened, and there were some young people on the street who were shaving ice, using shavers to shave ice and make snow cones. And I said, oh, we can do that. And so I went to the young man and said, can I write down the name of the manufacturer of that shaver you're using? He said, fine. So I wrote your name down. I went back and wrote a letter to the company that manufactured it and said, look, we're going to have this summer project for young people, and I want you to donate these shavers to us. You know, not knowing what they were going to do, but they sent us 8 of these shavers. And we went to the ice company in the city and said, look, here's a bit. And what I did, I called the young people together. I said, look, we're going to write a business plan, and I'm going to show you all how to do ordering and inventory and cash management and set of receipts and everything, and we're going to run this business. It was called Project Icy, and that's what we named it. The kids and I named it Project Icy. I had a architect on my staff, and I said to him I wanted him to design a concession stand for us. And so he designed the concession stand for us, and we had a big courtyard in the building where our offices were located. It had been an old convent building that we converted it and bought it, turned into an office, and had a big courtyard. So in the morning I would run over to my architect. He would show me what to do on the blueprints, which I'd never read a blueprint in my life.